with the urgency of the conversation, guys, let's be proactive about this rather than reactive. Let's not wait for this truck to drive over us and be left scrambling and figuring out what to do, how to address the deepest questions that humanity has in light of these technological advances. Let's talk about this now so we're ready. All right, everybody, welcome to the very first episode of The Catacombs. I'm your host, Ryan McLaughlin, and with me today is my co-host, John Dengler.
What's up, y'all?
We are here to talk about religion, spirituality, humanity, all the good stuff here at the dawn of Web 3. John and I both have a strong interest in all things metaverse-related, all things blockchain-related, all things artificial intelligence-related, emerging technologies and how they're going to affect our lives as human beings and what it is that we think about ourselves, what it is that we think about the world around us, what it is we think about God and spirituality and all that good stuff. John, why would you say we want to talk about this in particular? Why is this an urgent topic for us to talk about?
Well, I don't know. I'll just say for me personally, like my background, my history has really been, more than it was related to technology, which I would say is not actually my background. I guess my story, it's a long one, but the short version is in college, after kind of a long, reckless youth, I ate a bunch of acid one night and I had a religious experience and what transformed me forever and converted my major to religious studies and wanted to know what everyone in the world said about what matters most, what the meaning is about. I got really into philosophy and religion, started taking Jesus very seriously as like what I saw as the overlap of all of the religions. Seems like everybody claims Jesus a little bit. So I was like, that seems like an important dude to pay attention to. So I paid a lot of attention to Jesus, which got me really involved in, let's say, the Christian world, which, for better or for worse, I found myself not in love with that space all the time, with like Christian culture, this, that, and the other. That is a bit of my background. I, for years, have worked with trying to build like decentralized network of what we called microchurches or communities, kind of really inspired by liberation theology, kind of base communities, this, that, and the other. And then also living in intentional community, like looking at the early church and thinking, man, they held things in common. They shared, they, like governed kind of communally and was like, there's something really powerful to this. So I lived in intentional community for years, kind of a hippie commune, if, it'd be the most familiar thing for folks. But then I'd say a little over a year ago, about 14 months ago, I had known of cryptocurrency. This is where it begins for me. I had VR stuff, which I think was a little more kind of your world to me, was like, oh yeah, I've heard of that. That's cool. That'll, whatever. That'll probably be something at some point. That's interesting. Didn't really strike an interest. Neither did cryptocurrency to me, because it just seemed like another stock thing, an assets class, something to invest in.
I think a lot of folks have that reaction still today.
And I want to say it was Balaji that I heard in an interview. I believe it was an interview with Balaji Srivanasan. I don't know if I can say his last name correctly, but like he started talking about the programmability of smart contracts, what that could mean for the future of governance and community and collaboration, and a light bulb went off, and I was like, this is everything we've ever been trying to do. Like, and the actual the blockchain decentralization piece really stood out to me. And I thought, a lot of what's bothered me about the history of the church has been hierarchical leadership, centralization, and a lot of things we strived for were exactly the things that mapped with what I saw in like the Ethereum space. And so I just said, man, I think there's a real opportunity for the people of God here. There's a real opportunity for like the vision of the kingdom or the early church or something like that. And forever I've been trying to find a way away from, let's say, the church as we have known it. And then you and I start dialoguing and looking at like implications for VR. And actually I said, I don't know, one day we said, this is bringing up a lot of theological questions for me. What does this mean for humanity, about God, about the kingdom of God, about society, about what principalities and powers and all these things. And then you had some really interesting questions that were different than mine. But I was like, you know what? These are important conversations. And actually, the people that I see in the tech space, there's a lot of religion, especially in blockchain. This resembles, I was a religious studies major.
Sure.
It's very easy to see dogmatic community. It's very easy to see functional religion. It's very easy to spot these things, and they're not always in the most obvious of places. But I'm like, this is very much religious development that's happening here in these spaces, these communities. The maximalist kind of fundamentalism around certain coins or currencies really resembles religious communities in some powerful ways. And that was something interesting to me that I wanted to explore. So why do I think it's important? Well, I think that there is a tide coming in, that these technologies that are kind of emerging, that together, I guess, are being called Web3, look like a new epoch in human history and evolution. And it is going to change society fundamentally. And I don't think people see that wave coming. So one is blow the trumpet. And for people who do see it coming, to go, I'm not, I'll just give you this and I'll shut up. Dr. King, so a long time ago, said, we have advanced technologically so fast that we have turned the world into a neighborhood, but we have outpaced ourselves morally, and we have failed to evolve as quick ethically. And so while we've turned the world into a neighborhood, we've failed to turn it into a brotherhood. And I go, that was true when he's just saying, well, we have cars and airplanes. Right. And I'm like, bro, what do we do now? And the curve, the hockey stick now is like, we are going to exponentially transform so rapidly technologically. And I go, what does that mean for what we need in terms of spiritual community, spiritual engagement, a framework of ethics? And that's why I think it's an important conversation.
Love that. There's a similar Dr. King quote that I always go back to, where I'm probably going to paraphrase this, but he says something to the effect of, our scientific progress has outrun our spiritual progress.
This is the same
sermon, no doubt. But he says, we have guided missiles, but we have misguided men.
That's it.
And same sermon. But again, to your point though, he's talking in probably the late 50s or early 60s, I'm imagining, when that sermon was given, right? Oh my goodness.
Right.
I mean, he was prophetic in many ways, but he could not have seen what we're seeing coming, right?
Yeah.
So to give folks a little bit of my background, I, like you, John, have had a long time interest in philosophy and theology and religion. For a long time, been part of different Christian communities. I come at this from a professional standpoint as an educator. When I went back to get my master's degree in educational leadership, met my dear friend Adam Mangana. And Adam, one day in class, I'll never forget, this was 5 years ago now, Adam one day in class said, I think that virtual reality is going to change education forever, and it's going to happen really soon. And, I think, I tell the story, I think, there were 20 of us in the room at the time. I think of the 19 people besides Adam, I think 17 or 18 of them thought that he was absolutely bonkers. I kind of looked at him and was like, say more about that. I'm super interested in what you have to say. Long story short, Adam eventually puts us into an Oculus Rift, which was brand new technology at that point.
Yep.
He shows us an experience called I'm a Man, which, if you haven't seen the work of Dr. Derek Ham, the man is just a genius and a luminary and a pioneer in so many ways. But I Am a Man allows the participant to be in the body, be in the shoes of a black sanitation worker who was present when Dr. King is assassinated. Mm-hmm. So you get to see the streets of Memphis right after the Lorraine Motel happens. You get to experience what it's like to have a white police officer pull his gun on you, and as you raise your hands up. I watched one of our classmates, who was a very veteran, battle-hardened teacher, take the headset off, just in tears, openly weeping after this experience. And I said to myself then, like, oh my goodness, this is pure fire from the mountains that's being brought down. This technology is absolutely going to change education forever. Will it change education forever for good or for ill? And that's the open question to me. So I started to come at this from the perspective of, we have pure Promethean fire coming down to us from this mountaintop.
Yeah.
We better think about it theologically and philosophically and morally first, and not let our scientific progress outrun our spiritual progress, like Dr. King said, because this is going to raise huge questions about what it means to be a human being, what it means to act morally, what it means to be embodied. What does bodily autonomy mean in the metaverse?
Yeah.
And then I love that you and I started talking, because you came at this from the blockchain angle, I came at this from the VR angle, but we're arriving at the same space, I think, because Web3 is the overlap of all of this.
That's right.
It's the overlap of all of this. And so we share that philosophical and theological concern. We're coming at it from different technological emphasis, but like it's really all the same thing.
Yeah, and the shared kind of spiritual history, not that we did that together, but that we come out of or are emerging from the same tradition, influenced by a lot of the same tradition. I think it's great because it gives us a really good common language to dialogue about these things. And our hope for folks that are listening in is that, one, that this is an interesting conversation spiritually. This is an interesting conversation to develop your awareness of these emerging technologies, and then actually putting those things in dialogue with one another. There is incredible questions that need to be asked. And the reality is, like you were saying, like, this is such a powerful tool that's been put into our hands. And the reality is, like, the technology is inevitable. So, like, it's always been, so this is interesting. I always jokingly say this, but I'm like, everything that we have technologically, to me, seems like we have it because of porn and military.
Yeah.
So I go, well, fighting and fucking has led the way. Like, because we fight and fuck, we build the internet. We build even VR. We build these streaming video services. And I go, and by the way, this isn't, I'm not even to say like finger wag to say like, no, like there are drives in mankind that have led us to evolve our technological accomplishments. But to go, some of the most base pieces of humanity have led the way on, let's say, the frontal lobe development in terms of our technological advancement. But the frontal lobe is also like where we go conscious, moral, ethical, and it's like we need to do some curls here.
Yeah.
Because it's fine. Okay, it developed this way for whatever reason, but it's like, is this what we want? Because evolution is now such that we are consciously engaged in becoming, like what we want us to become, we are making decisions about. And at a macro level, I think that's super important. But for me, I go at a very micro level, like, what do we do with our children? What do we do with education? What do we do with our families or our neighborhoods or our churches, even our communities? And so I know you sent me a bunch of topics. I don't know, today what you want to kind of dig into, but I'm going to I feel like you're going to lead the way here. So I am happily co-host.
I just, to your point about fighting and fucking leading the way, I want folks to understand the urgency of this conversation, because it's very easy to look at some of the things that you and I have talked about, some of the topics we proposed for this show, and say, well, shit, that looks like sci-fi, right? Like, are these guys just a couple of sci-fi nerds that want to talk about Philip K. Dick novels? Or
I am definitely not a sci-fi nerd. In fact, I can barely
there you go.
sit through sci-fi, honestly. But although
that makes one of us. I'm a huge sci-fi nerd.
But I will say I kick myself these days because I want to learn all this stuff about blockchain, and I go, oh my gosh, I'm none of this. So I wasn't into games. So the VR kind of gamer, and there's play to earn kind of blockchain gaming. I wasn't a gamer. I don't get it, but gamers get it. I wasn't a technologist, coder, whatever, but like people get it. Like, oh, I knew JavaScript, and so I picked up Solidity. No big deal. I wasn't into gambling. But there's like actually an interesting gambling overlap here. I wasn't, and there's all of these overlaps of all. It's basically like this is an accumulation of things I haven't paid attention to. That all of a sudden I went, this is the most important thing that's happening, And now I'm like behind. I feel behind. Now I will say that I love learning new things,
Right.
and I've basically haven't slept for the last year because I've just been like, I'm gonna learn all this. Now I still don't know Solidity, and I still don't know all these things, or Unity and
Sure.
Solidity, and I can't code, and I'm not a technologist, and I still don't play games. I mean, even the VR headset I got, I'm like, it seems like there's nothing to do but games, and I don't play games. So it can't hold my attention. Now I know that there's more to do there, and you and I have things that we intend to do, and I hope for you to share with everybody how it is so much more than games. Because and maybe this is a bit of a teaser of places we'll go. Because by the way, guys, Ryan and I are not just doing this podcast together, but we are planning to build some real tools, some real things to engage with faith communities. Utilizing some of these technologies we're talking about, because we are not just wanting to pontificate around the overlap of faith community and Web3, but to go, no, we want to be practitioners that process in real time here with us. So as we journey through the things
both
that we
words
build,
and deeds,
we want to share those things, in word here. But we want to, like, when we are not recording here, we want to be out building and hopefully leading the way a little bit in some things that maybe some people aren't paying attention to.
Absolutely. And they should be paying attention. To come back to the urgency of these conversations, one of the topics that I sent you, John, for a future episode was sex in the metaverse, or sex with robots, right?
Oh, the Harpers.
The Harpers thing, right? So you hear that and you think, well, shit, like, the first time I think about it is there was several episodes of the show Futurama about this, right? This is cartoonish. This is sci-fi.
Right,
but,
right.
You know,
is that
you just
Westworld?
Said, yeah, right. Westworld. That was Michael Crichton, right?
That was so good, though.
I don't
know. Well,
the first season.
Yeah,
the first season was,
it started really strong.
But this isn't just sci-fi. This isn't just HBO or Cartoon Network. This is the front page of Harper's Magazine this past month. Sex with VR, sex with robots. We have serious ethical, moral, philosophical, anthropological questions to think about in light of that. And if we don't start thinking about it, this technology is going to run us over in 6 months, a year, 2 years maybe at the most. But this is already here. This is coming, and it's already here. And so we have to start thinking about this now, because what I think we've both watched in previous technological revolutions is that the church tends to be reactive, and we're both coming from a Christian perspective on this, but I think faith communities as a whole tend to be reactive rather than proactive, and that leads us right back to that trap that Dr. King was talking about guiding missiles and misguiding men. And so I think the urgency here is, let's start talking about it so we don't keep repeating that same mistake.
Yeah, I feel like that kind of conversation around Harper's probably should remain a teaser. Well, one, because there's enough there to dig into for an entire episode. Also, I did not read it in its entirety, so it was quite long. You sent it to me, and I need to read through it. But can you give, like, we'll just make this kind of intro episode a little teasery on all of these things. Let's just, like, run through a little table of contents of things we hope to cover. But, like,
for sure,
can you give a little, like, for instance, maybe for those listening, like, what are you saying? So how is what are these questions you're talking about?
So I'll tell a story that I've told you a couple of times, John. In 2013, a gamer by the name of Breen Malmsteen, and I apologize if I'm butchering his name, downloaded the latest iteration of the BioShock series, which is a popular video game series. He immediately requested his money back. And as best I can tell, no one outside of the hardcore gaming community paid any attention to this whatsoever. I didn't pay attention to it. I'm not really a part of the gaming community myself, except by proxy through my children. But Breen Malmsteen requested a refund in 2013 because the very first action that you are required to take in the game is to press a button to accept baptism into a non-Christian religion, a fake religion that had been made up for the game, but nonetheless a non-Christian religion. And this gamer said to the company, like, listen, what you are asking me to do is blasphemous. It's impious.
And you can't play the game without doing it.
Can't play the game without doing it. And as you start to dig into that, first of all, this was almost a decade ago. We're talking about a stock character. We're not talking about an individualized avatar like we already have in VR. We're not talking about a highly personalized experience. We're talking about a off-the-shelf video game. But what we're talking about is a form of media over which you have some agency. And by taking agency, you take over some of the moral responsibility for your actions. And so here we are, almost a decade ago, and this guy is saying, and I'm putting words into his mouth at this point, but what I'm seeing in his conversation is you are asking me to take actions in a virtual world that have real world implications for my belief system. Now that we're in 2022, now that the Oculus Quest 2 is becoming more and more ubiquitous in society as folks begin to individualize their avatars to look just like them, as folks begin to have more immersive experiences complete with haptic feedback, those questions of what I can and cannot do in the metaverse and what counts and doesn't count, what's ethical and what's unethical, these questions are just getting more pressing. I think we're quickly going to have faith communities wrestling with the sorts of questions like, does baptism in VR count? If I desecrate a holy object from another faith in VR, does the other person have a right to get mad at me because it's just ones and zeros and not atoms and molecules? If I decide to be a part of a faith community, can it be just as meaningful in my life if we only ever meet up in a social VR experience and not in person, not face-to-face? So these are the sorts of questions that faith communities are going to be forced to address within a year or two anyways. Mm-hmm. And again, with the urgency of the conversation, guys, let's be proactive about this rather than reactive. Let's not wait for this truck to drive over us and be left scrambling and figuring out what to do, how to address the deepest questions that humanity has in light of these technological advances. Let's talk about this now so we're ready.
Yeah, for those listening, this is really interesting. And I'll just tell you kind of on the. So by the way, if you are not out of the Christian tradition, just for framework, there's this idea of baptism. I think most people are familiar with getting dunked in some water or whatever. Sure. But
sprinkled.
There's a don't make us argue about that here. We're here to talk tech, baby. So so there is this Christian tradition, this thing that is done. This narrative of Jesus. There's this Baptist, John the Baptist, before he baptizes Jesus, and he's baptizing kind of for repentance. He's this kind of Jewish prophet. But then in the early church, baptism becomes like a kind of a rite of entry. So a declaration of faith, saying, I am gonna follow Jesus. I'm gonna give my life, and I'm gonna declare Jesus Lord, and I'm gonna join this community. And there's this symbol, this symbolic gesture that is, I'm going to go be buried in the water and then risen with Christ, right? And I'm going to be, and so baptism is an important thing. So the question of does baptism, so by the way, I joke, don't make us argue about sprinkle versus dunk or whatever. There are arguments among church folk that want to be let's say nitpicky about the mechanism with which how that's done. And this has been going on for 2,000 years. People are arguing about does it count depending on who baptized you, depending on how you were baptized, where you were baptized, what they said when you were baptized. Did they sprinkle it over your head or did they put you under the water? Well, you can only imagine and by the way, I'll just say, I think Ryan and I are probably at least close to the same page. We're probably in the same chapter of the book going, come on, guys, seriously, yeah. What are we fighting about here? Yeah. And yet this is a big deal. And then I'll just say, there is, and I'm going to give you a little bit of real time context. So, next Wednesday I leave. So I'm time stamping this a little bit. So whatever it is, what it is. I think we're deciding here that we're doing that. So, but I was invited. Okay. I'm going to give you a couple. There's a group called the Leadership Network, and the Leadership Network is putting on they're gathering folks for what they're calling a metaverse church summit. Really, they're doing like a learning community that's going to basically, people are going to join this community over the next year. And churches, I think the list right now is like, I don't know, 20 something churches. And I shared that with you earlier. It's about
You
right.
did, yeah.
20 churches from around the country that are doing something metaverse related. I think most people, when they use the word metaverse, mean VR. I will forever nitpick that because I feel it's insufficient. And when I say metaverse, I mean digital ownership. I don't mean VR, but I think those two, and I'm not saying, and I say that's insufficient because I think it's all of the above, and that's actually what is emerging here with Web3. But there is a group of church folks going, well, what does this mean? So I just pulled up their website. So for framework, I'm aware of these folks, but I'm also participating in this. I was invited to be part of this group. I'm nervously attending because I do worry that it'll be like an overly churchy thing that's going to, like, you know, even if you Google church and metaverse, what you'll see is like a mega church built in Engage where people are going and watching a lady worship on a PowerPoint screen from the front. That concerns me because I don't like that in real life. And by the way, even saying in real life bothers me too, because both these are real, but in the physical, so I would think physical digital, but there's a digital version of this physical representation of what the church probably never should have been to begin with, in my estimation. For those that want to know me a little more, I think Christianity almost ceased to exist when Rome embraced Christianity, and I don't know that we've seen it since. There are let's say pieces of the faith. I do think there are living faith among us, but I do think we lost something tremendous when we stopped being underground, illegal, subversive, and decentralized.
We agree on that.
So back to this. I was invited to be part of this, and maybe part curiosity, part want to be part of any group that's saying yes to these new technologies rather than saying no to them. Although I do like the Amish, and I assume they're saying no for now as well. But they're asking questions. Basically, what is the metaverse? What is the church currently doing in the metaverse? What is the potential of the metaverse in relation to the church and its mission? And so they're asking questions about disciple making. How will metaverse technologies like VR and AR and mixed reality, even artificial intelligence, help complement the disciple making process? Basically teaching people what it means to follow Jesus, as well as what they're saying, as well as what is going on. How will this relate to the physical churches? And then metaverse mission field. How does engaging in the metaverse communities like VR, alt VR, VR chat? I'm reading this because I don't use all these words. Rec Room, Facebook Horizon, avatar-based communities. What will this mean for the mission field? They're saying the harvest is big. The workers ? What are we going to do in this space? By the way, for those of you who don't know, that's a reference to the harvest is plentiful, the workers are few. Something Jesus said. So there's the metaverse churches. Like, what will a church look like, and how does it relate to like biblical ecclesiology? A question that might be the question that most makes me want to engage in this group, because I go, well, let's forget the metaverse for a second and go, because what I think is happening when we say metaverse and church is two words we don't know what they mean, and we're putting them together, and now I'm double bind problematic.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I'm like, you're not wrong.
But they're asking these questions, so I'll be joining them. And actually, as I look at the website, by the way, Ryan, if you can clear your calendar, I could probably get you on this, which never seemed like a thing until just now. But we'll see. I don't know. Let me know. And we're recording this, and they all might listen and go, "No, you can't." I don't know. So, but
they might not want us there after they listen to us say
back to the
VR's about
I think we're going to
fighting.
air it after we get there. So, what I'm thinking though is, as you were talking about the baptism piece, I wanted to highlight that, because as I was being introduced to this concept and invited into it and asking questions, so I got invited because of my relation to a network here in Tampa called the Underground Network, that is what was trying to do this decentralized movement of what we called micro churches, based communities.
We would have called it house churches in the 90s.
House churches. Mm-hmm. So we did house churches, but then also like the Well was a micro church. So like these things that weren't house based, they were market based. So the Agora, which by the way, one day I want to, not for this episode, this podcast necessarily, but I just learned that the Agora translates to the marketplace, and that agoraphobic is the only way I know that word in English language, which, you know, I always assume is scared to go outside.
Sure, like
but it made me immediately think when I heard it that the church is agoraphobic. that it is.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's really a powerful thing. And then now they want to anyway. So
or
this,
on the opposite end of the spectrum, agoraphilic and is way too in love with the marketplace, right?
well, that might be we might need to do an episode there if we can figure out a way
That'll be our
that
Patreon only
that will
content.
lap it. That will, yeah. So yeah, we'll have all kind of spin-off arguments because Ryan also likes to just go, we're going to argue about that for an hour, and then we'll do that sometimes
Guilty as
as
charged.
well. So we'll
Guilty as
edit
charged.
those out, and those will be behind a paywall or something. I don't know what we'll do here. So okay, so the reason I want to bring that up is a friend sent me a screenshot from some community that's going to be part of this. It's like their Discord. And they were congratulating a young man who had been baptized in the metaverse. So when you said that, like, does it count? I go, oh, I can hear all the people arguing. Well, what stood out and what people found funny.
See the
let's
urgency
say,
of the conversation,
that-
folks? It's
that-
already
yeah,
happening.
They are baptizing in the metaverse, and the kid that was being, so you have avatars, right? For those of you that aren't
Sure.
familiar, you have like here's a representation of me. And like you said, some people are making those very lifelike, scanning in tons of photos of themselves, and you can actually model something fairly similar to what you look like.
Mine looks a lot like me. It's
So
recognizable.
it's super ugly.
Well, you know.
Forgive me.
Some of us bring brains rather than looks to the table, John.
So this, I forget the guy's name, but it had his, like, avatar name, and then it had his, AKA Jeff or whatever
Sure,
it was,
sure.
was baptized today. And congratulations, welcome to the family, celebrating this, that, and the other. Awesome. This dude has given his life to Jesus. Well, the avatar was, I don't know, a fox, a skunk. It was some animal that they had baptized. So a friend of mine who saw the screenshot said, this is crazy. They were baptizing a squirrel.
Oh.
She said they were baptizing a squirrel in a waterfall.
I hadn't heard this part of it.
The VR game. And so what stood out to me, though, when I saw the screenshot of this wasn't, and this is interesting, it wasn't the squirrel. It was the two pastors that were baptizing, because they looked just like the cliche skinny jean, white, kind of
evangelical
graphic
pastor.
tee.
Yeah,
I was just like, oh, this is just, I went to an exponential conference, and
See you
this
at the
is
Skillet
this
concert.
is the look.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, that's funny. They and then that made me think, oh, are we going to replicate a lot of the mistakes that we've made historically in this space? Now, I don't want to nitpick on these folks,
Sure.
but I did want to bring it up to go, this isn't hypothetical. Like, I'm traveling to go sit at this table with fear and trembling, but also a sense of conviction and responsibility to be part of this conversation.
Here's what I wonder. I wonder if the pastors that engaged in that metaverse baptism realized the can of worms that they were opening, because the Christian tradition has always held that baptism, and like you said earlier, we disagree on the meaning of it, we disagree on how to do it, we disagree on what to say, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
Who should be baptized?
Ad nauseum.
But
Gonna
we
fight over
we all agree that baptism is something that happens physically to your body.
Yep.
So what these pastors are in a sense implying is that if this counts, then your avatar is in some way an extension of your body.
Right.
Well, holy shit, because what else happens with your body? Well, sexual acts happen with your body. If
you and me have our avatars sleep together, are we
are
homosexual?
we committing adultery? Are we
I'm
cheating on
also
our
married,
wives?
yes.
Yeah. We are both happily married, and our wives would probably have something to say about that, I would imagine.
They're going to say something about this conversation.
I can already see them cringing as they listen to this. Just in the news recently, and I haven't dived into the details yet, but just recently there was reports on the first person claiming to have been sexually assaulted in the metaverse.
Yeah.
And if baptism counts in the metaverse, then sexual assault also counts in the metaverse. And so we haven't decided yet, because we haven't thought through, and this goes right back to the urgency of these questions.
This is what we want to talk about.
This is what we want to talk about. If your avatar is an extension of yourself, then we've got a lot of shit to unpack and a lot to deal with.
And by the way, I just want to say to those listening, because I can almost hear your eyes rolling, some of you. Or maybe it's not.
Right.
And your baptism didn't count, and that didn't count, and this doesn't matter, and this is all just silly. But that is also a statement about something. And so what this reminds me of...
And I suspect the subjective experience of the person being baptized is going to conflict with that assessment, and I'm guessing that person's faith is going to be damaged enormously by you discounting the reality of his experience.
Yeah, so I just want to go, for the sake of everyone listening, that decision is a decision.
Right.
And this isn't just your lack of familiarity with it gets to roll your eyes. I mean, I don't know. I think back to like when the internet came out, and like my dad thought this is the silliest thing ever, and I will never be putting my credit card into the computer. And here we are, like everything comes through Amazon. It's like, guys, you've already said yes 9 million times to things you would have said, you would have thought you would have said no to. But this is like a frog being boiled in a pot. Like this is what's happening. And if you are not joining an Amish community that is the latest of adopters, they're not even saying no to technology. They're just beginning to pick up where we left off a long time ago. And they're running them through a system of values, which I actually think should be maybe a conversation for one of our shows, is the mechanism that they use for filtering technologies that they say yes to is actually a framework of ethics.
Yeah.
Will the car help us be closer to our value of community or not? No? Well, then we don't do it. And so do we adopt these technologies?
Yeah, it's a lot less deontological a system of ethics than people suppose from the outside, right? Like I actually just the other day learned that there's an Amish community here in Florida that does allow electricity in their homes. But to your point, they made that decision as a community, and they ran that through the system of values first, right? So in some ways, the Amish are way ahead of us on this conversation because they have already said.
I actually think we have a lot to learn from them.
Yeah.
And actually, an interesting guy to listen to, if you guys aren't familiar, is Kevin Kelly, who is actually an editor for Wired magazine, a futurist. He actually wrote a book. I don't know if it's his last book, but he has a book called The Inevitable, which is unbelievable to listen to. Each chapter goes through like something about emerging technology. This is just a few years old and so far spot on.
Yeah.
But he spends like half of his time with the Amish. So he has this very interesting life of cutting edge technology and then living in a Christian intentional community. Like he spends his time there and he's like, I need to have a foot in both camps because this is actually, and there's something important, and we can go, these are outlier communities. What they are archetypal of an overlap that's happening even in our own lives. Like we are making these decisions, what we're saying yes to, what we're saying no to. One thing we want to do is highlight that we are saying, like, how much of your life now is actually digital, right? Mm-hmm. What your forms of communication? Oh, you're listening to a podcast, you're writing an email, you're sending a text message.
Thank you for listening to the podcast, by the way.
When's the last time you wrote a handwritten letter, and what was the purpose of it? Your communication, your interactions, all of these things how much of your money is digital,
right?
Like forget blockchain, just like it's in the bank, it's numbers on a screen, it's whatever. And so we've said yes to a digital life. And to me, that's the actual division or the thing of going, what metaverse might mean. It's encompassing the physical and the digital and the overlap of those things. And like, I love this question you're bringing up. And I think like, we're going to really dig into like how the body and the avatar overlap. And that's something we really need to dig into. And then I think another important piece of this, or something, not a piece of this, a question that comes up for me, and I think related to this, is just dualism in general of like the kind of Western mind going, we have souls and we have bodies. Mm-hmm. And so like, Socrates would say something like, my soul is imprisoned in my body. And they said like the body was something like dirty and wrong and, holding me captive, and I want to be I want spiritually to be set free. There's a lot of religious implications of that, and a lot of religious people still think that way. And then you have the Enlightenment, where they're like, you know what, that world of gods and genies and spirituality, you can have all that. We care about what's physical, what you can touch, what you can feel. And lately, so we do this pendulum swing. So we live in a dualistic world, and I actually think we're existentially dualistic beings because we're capable of crying and pooping and bleeding and fighting and fucking and all of these things. And then also we're capable of symbol. We're capable of ethics. We're capable of, and so we have this other part of us. We're existentially dualistic. Then we have ideological dualistic framework that is, let's say, Western and postmodern. But then now you have an emergence of a non-physical, let's say, metaverse that is emerging. That is, it resembles these questions, but it isn't the same question because it actually isn't just the world of the forms. It's like this other digital extension of the physical world. And I just always wonder, like, what would Aristotle think of this? Like, what would he make of this?
You know, it's interesting because you raise Aristotle, you raised Socrates earlier, and Socrates, as our friend Adam is wont to point out, was skeptical of books. Socrates had a problem with the technology of writing. He was worried about the effects that it would have on mankind's ability to remember things and to relate to one another without some sort of intermediary of writing, right? What our friends, the Amish, I think, really highlight for us, though, is that technology in and of itself isn't good, and it's not bad either. It's a tool, right? I mean, think of a hammer. A hammer can be used to nail pieces of wood together and to build a house. It's a wonderful tool. A hammer can also be used to kill people. Hammers have been used as instruments of war in the past. A hammer in and of itself is a morally and ethically neutral proposition, right? What you do with it. And that's the importance of the spiritual technology being advanced along with the physical technology. And I don't think, we talk about dualism. I think that the negative aspects of dualism are when we say that one of these things matters and not the other, right? The body matters, but not the spirit. The spirit matters, but not the body. I think you and I both come from a theological perspective that affirms that both of them are incredibly important. And the negative aspect of dualism is picking one or the other. And that's the urgency of the questions that we're talking about, because we have to affirm that both the mind and the body, or the body and the spirit, if you want to frame it that way, those things both matter, and they're both involved with the decision of how to use the hammer that is cryptocurrency, the hammer that is VR, the hammer that is artificial intelligence, et cetera, et cetera.
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, there is something very agnostic to the mechanisms that are at our disposal. We have glasses in front of us, a pen. I have a pen and paper, but I could write hateful words or life-giving words, right? I could breathe beauty into existence or destruction, right? And what is the power of life and death is contained in the tongue. And actually these are all kind of extensions of our articulations. And I don't know, man, I'm really excited to do this with you. I'm excited about our list of topics, even like running through these right now. Like all of these feel like, oh, I want to run down that rabbit hole. I want to run down that rabbit hole.
And we will. So stay tuned.
Yeah, we will. So, And I actually think after we do a couple of these, we should probably schedule and announce one or two of these that we can do real time. Maybe we can stream or do live, so we can actually take some engagement from folks or have some.
Maybe we could even do this in the metaverse, John.
We probably will figure out a way to do that as well. One of the things that, depending on the platform we put this up on, but I imagine we can put a way out there for you guys to, even now, to just chime in with what you're thinking, even though it won't be real time. You can send in a voice message and say, hey, here's something I'm wondering about. Here's a topic I want you to cover. Here's a question that I have. And maybe, that'll give us the audio of your question, like a voicemail, maybe something we can run through some of those even on the show. I also, because I'm going to be part of over this next year, this like metaverse church kind of learning community, I plan on debriefing here with you guys. Yeah. Are you able to share at all about some of the mission kind of things that you're mulling over right now? I think we're working on some projects that I'm excited to share. And
we've just recently started talking about this. One of the things, for those of you that don't know me, I serve as the missions pastor at Waters Avenue Church, where John and I both attend. And one of the things that I'm mulling over is how VR can be used to take mission trips. Having grown up in the faith, mission trips were a huge part of my experience as a teenager and as a college student. Within faith communities. I had the chance to go to Peru twice. I had the chance to go to Cuba twice. I had the chance to go to Brazil once. Absolutely changed who I am as a human being. And at the same time, I'm able to look back at those experiences critically and say, like, you know what? It might not have been the best idea to take a 14-year-old white American teenager to a third world country and just let them loose on some evangelism shit. You know what I mean? So one of the things that we're kind of mulling over is, can we duplicate some of the positive aspects of that mission trip experience?
The immersion experience or something
right,
like that?
Right. The immersion, the eye-opening experience of stepping outside of the American bubble and seeing how most of the rest of the world lives.
Yeah.
Witnessing, yeah, for sure. So which parts of the positive side of the mission trip experience can be replicated in VR? Or to take it from the angle of the missionaries, how can missionaries use VR to tell their stories back home? So, you know, we're in conversations about, like, when a missionary comes back from the field, can you show your home congregation what it's truly like to be a missionary in the Dominican Republic, for instance? So we're exploring how this technology can be used like that. You and I are talking about possibly throwing together our first VR mission trip here over the next couple of months.
So pumped about it.
Me too, man. Me too. I think there's so much potential there, and I think it's going to do a lot of good without some of the negative externalities, let's say. Or hopefully. I mean, I guess we'll discover new negative externalities to address as we go along.
It occurs to me, though, when we say things like metaverse mission trip,
yeah,
that, you know, for folks listening, like, what the, I mean, by the way, I'm just like, can anyone imagine what that is? I mean, we are trying to imagine what that looks
doing
like.
the best we can.
So, like, what does that look like?
Yeah. I think that what it probably looks like in this first iteration, which is to say that we are going to continue to improve and continue to learn and continue to come up with new iterations on what this means. I think in this first iteration, it probably looks like a youth group or a Sunday school group putting some headsets on, traveling, quote unquote, to a foreign land of some sorts.
Yep.
We've talked about the Dominican Republic as being kind of first on our list here. Experiencing what it's like to be there through some of the extremely realistic immersive experiences that we're able to build pretty easily and cheaply. And then once the headsets are taken off, engaging that youth group or engaging that Sunday school class in some tangible form of service, whether it's gathering food for the local Dominican community or whether it's going and serving, a Dominican neighborhood in some tangible way, connecting the virtual and the real in some meaningful way that doesn't require that we load up a plane with 14-year-old Americans and spend tens of thousands of dollars that could be better spent elsewhere.
I mean, yeah, dude, like, it's so funny because I've also gone on a lot of trips to a lot of places, and I would say, I mean, genuinely, so much of who I am and what I want to do in life, I can point to these trips.
Same.
To time spent in Haiti, to time spent in Manila, Philippines, because I mean, I mean, my time in the slums of the Philippines wrecked me, right?
Yeah,
like, it's because I went there and I saw, material poverty like I'd never known, but I saw joy like I'd never known. Right. I saw community like I'd never known. And I actually, I'm not real good with emotions. And I remember feeling something the whole time. I was like, I don't know what this feeling is. And I came to realize it was jealousy. Like, I was jealous of the people in the Philippines because of the joy and the community and the innovation and the gratitude that I saw there. I was like, man, like, this is where we're in poverty. Right, what they have. And I came to see that as like the wealth of the poor. And honestly, a lot of the work of the well and a lot of what I do with my life is trying to recapture what I got a taste of in Manila, Philippines.
Right.
Well, okay. So I go, man, but then I look back at things that I did, the mission trip thing that, I worked for a time for this, I was a youth leader for, if you could imagine, for a Presbyterian USA church.
I don't think I knew that.
Yeah. Cause I was working for InterVarsity, and, so I was doing college ministry, and I was a good fit for. It was really good, but I can't raise money like at all. I just suck at raising money. Always have. I don't know, whatever. Lots of reasons. I could fill in the blanks here, but you guys could imagine. So I can't raise money really well, but there was a local church one of my students went to, said they need a youth pastor, and there's a very small church, and there's a budget, and they could pay you to come in on Wednesday nights and Sundays and work with these kids. And I'm like, oh yeah, totally. Well, I did that. And I did it really well, actually. It went well. It was really good. It actually crashed and burned just because it actually was related to doing well. Yeah. I got them to invite a bunch of friends from school. A bunch of kids came in with blue hair and pants around their knees and chain wallets and this, that, and the other. And they were treated horribly by some of the old people in the church. And then
local tax collectors and adulteresses.
And then I told those old people what I thought about the way they treated these kids that I loved. And they were the elders. And they ultimately fired me. It actually was funny enough. We were talking about baptism earlier. It actually came down to baptism. A couple kids said, "I want to follow Jesus."
Yeah.
And I'm gonna. And I said, "Well, you should get baptized."
Yeah.
And they said, "Okay, let's get baptized." I said, "Cool. We'll go to the beach on Sunday. We'll take a big trip with all the kids, and we'll go out to the beach." Well, the Presbyterians sprinkle, and it has to be done by an elder, and it has to be done on a Sunday service. I said, wait a minute. It has to be done with one of those people that treated these kids like shit. Mm-hmm. And the pastor's like, yeah, well, by the way, the pastors have no power in these congregations in this model.
Right.
So he's like, no, it has to be done this way. You're not allowed. And I was like, well, you're not capable of stopping me. And so I did exactly that. And then I lost my job. So anyway, but why did I bring this up? So I did that for a season. While I was there was a woman. Actually, this is really crazy. So do you like plantain chips?
Of course, yeah.
So there's a company called Chifles.
Sure.
Yep. So the woman that was a part of that church, her husband was the owner and founder. He had passed, so she owned Chifles.
Nice.
And their family was out of Honduras.
Yeah.
And this woman who I loved, she was not one of the mean old elders. She was the most beautiful, amazing woman that gave me plantains and took me to Honduras. And so we went to Honduras, and we actually took the youth group to Honduras. And we did this like roof repair on this like church building. A couple of things. I mean, one, just memories. This is crazy to go through. One of them that really stands out is like, we had all these like, white American kind of men. Some of the dads went to help build. We were doing a building project. So we need builders there. But they're used to power tools. They're used to and they're kind of like alpha in attitude, but they're ignorant in culture, and then they don't have the tools they need. And it was a train wreck. I remember sitting there watching these guys like, wow, this is wildly offensive. This is wildly upsetting. And they're like belittling this whole process, going, well, next time I'm going to bring my, my chop saw or whatever. And meanwhile, there's like no electricity.
Of course.
There's none of the things that you're going to need to run your batteries or your power tools or whatever. And I'm like, by the way, are you just afraid of hard work? Just run the damn saw like a man. Come on. Well, anyway, I was pretty young at this time still. But I was wild.
To be fair, you would have said the same thing yesterday.
So. Yeah, I would. And I wildly impressed with the work ethic of the people that lived there. The way, I remember seeing these guys load a dump truck on a riverbed with sand, with shovels, throwing this sand up over the top of the dump truck to load it.
Sure.
And I was like, I've never seen people work like this in my life. So blown away. Anyway, all this to say, I guarantee when we left, they redid that roof.
Yeah.
It wasn't well done. They were allowing us to do it, and I actually think it cost them. Now, we paid for everything, I'm sure. Like, we raised a bunch of money, but you're saying $10,000. Like, we had to get all these airline tickets. We had to travel all this distance. And by the way, these kids, I guarantee, if any of you are listening, like, call me and tell me, I guarantee were profoundly shaped by this experience. Maybe not 100%, but to some of them, it meant to them what the Philippines meant to me.
Right.
And it shaped you. It changed you. And it's like the reason to go is you. And actually, these countries are being hospitable.
Right.
And they are being the Christians, allowing you to come in and giving you what you need and allowing you to feel like you're giving them what they need. And so one of the things around this VR experience thing that I'm really excited about is, can we recreate the experience for the kids in our community here without taxing those communities there? And then, oh, by the way, if we were going to raise $1,200 to send this little jit to this country that has no business in, can we still raise that amount of money? I know we're not going to do that round one, but could we still raise that amount of money and then give it to these communities or work with them or invest in them in some capacity? Because like the amount of money that could be leveraged this way, I'm wildly excited about.
Yeah, I think that, oh man, so many thoughts in response to that. My 5th mission trip was to Brazil. Mm-hmm. And we went
Where in
to
Brazil?
Cuiabá State, which is kind of in the Amazon region, but not actually in the Amazon, if that makes sense. And we were doing construction projects, right? And at the time I'm going to go ahead and say 21. So not 14, but also not like an actual adult yet. Yep. So on a construction site, I was more or less useless, right?
A boy.
Yeah, a boy, for sure. But, while I'm there, we're not using hard hats or anything like that, right? So I remember somebody accidentally kicked off a piece of a brick as I was walking underneath. And that piece of a brick nailed me square on the top of my head. And I'll never forget kind of like, moment. And I looked down and I moved my hand away. And of course, like blood is shooting out, right?
So bad, yeah.
Oh my gosh, so much blood. And, they took me to the local hospital and they stitched me up real nice, I got to tell you. And the doctor that had been in with the mission was allowed to come back with me. And that doctor who had been with the mission had not been allowed in the hospital before that, right? And so we left, and he looked at me. He was like, "They just invited me back." He's, translating from Portuguese. He's like, "They just invited me back to come do more work with them. Your little stitching incident there just made some real advances for my work." And I was like, "Well, do you want me to like cut off a finger and go to the next hospital down the road?" He's like, "No, we're good for today." But
that's the most valuable thing you could do is get hit in the head with a brick.
Right. I share that story.
Son.
Yeah, exactly. I share that story to come back to a little bit of a theology of the cross in terms of missiology, if you'll allow me, because I think that it was in my weakness and my being humbled that I was able to contribute. And so I wonder if the opportunity for VR through that theology of the cross would be to show people what they don't know before we actually immerse them in the real situation. Because, by the way, like my own kids who are, my oldest is just finishing up elementary school this week, actually. Awesome. Yeah, for sure. I can't believe I actually have a middle schooler, which is wild. I'm not ready for that. But, I very much want all 3 of my kids to have that real world mission trip experience someday. Yep. I would like for them to have some exposure and some knowledge that I didn't have before my first trip when I was 14 and I went to Peru, so they don't make complete asses of themselves on that first trip. And I'm wondering if we can send out more effective missionaries, more effective youth group mission trips, because we've got VR to enable some of this. I think about some of the other fields that are using VR training right now, right? Like that are meant to avoid costly mistakes. Airline pilots and fighter pilots are the obvious example, but there are so many others. The healthcare field is using VR to train surgeons so you don't fuck up surgery the first time you get in there.
There's been like a version of this for shooting.
Oh, yeah. Adam and I talked to some folks who were in conversations with a whiskey distiller in Tennessee that were talking about having a master distillery program in VR. Yeah. Because, by the way, if you screw up an entire barrel of whiskey, that's expensive. You should, right? Yeah, so that's monetary value, but like also in terms of missions, if you bring a bunch of raw 14-year-old kiddos that have never had an experience of the third world before, you can also cause spiritual damage. I'm wondering how much of that spiritual damage can be headed off at the pass by VR. The truth is we don't know, but we're going to try. We're going to experiment.
Well, and we have to, right?
Yeah.
So like these are realities that we need to explore. And like, you know, for there are temperamental realities that all of us, you know, some of us are more orderly, some of us are more industrious, some of us are more prone to negative emotion. Some of us are more open to experience and generally more creative, more entrepreneurial, but open, let's say hospitable to the future. So I have always been someone that is very interested in what's around the corner, that what's coming. My eyes are always on the horizon, and I always think about, you know, one of the things that I get really upset about now, hopefully at some point I also have children and can hold all of my thoughts about what people do with their children against my own actions. Cause like I'm
reality and theory are always
right.
Yeah,
so like I'm aware.
Yeah.
But I also look at a lot of things that, I mean, even the way that we were raised, and I go, man, you know, my dad taught me well based on the world that he grew up in. Yeah. But he did not grow up in the world that I grew up in. Right. Times they are a changing, and like I think a big mistake that I see is that folks are raising children for the world that we live in, rather than the world that we will live in. And I often think about, I use surfing as an analogy a lot. Like you have to paddle before the wave comes. And I'm always like wanting to look out at the future. Now, my wife is not that way. So she hates every idea that is futuristic. Like I don't like this. I don't want any of this. I want to bury my money in a coffee can in the yard. I don't want to be on the internet at all. I just want to like talk to the 8 people that live within 8 blocks of me.
Hi, Erica.
and like, you know, she would happily be a Luddite, you know, frankly. I mean, you know, she's glad she could text her friends that live in other states. She uses technology, but she's not a fan. Whereas I'm like, wait, what can we do? What can we do? Like I hear about like, oh, like this is probably a conversation like to think about like maybe for a whole episode even is the augmentation. So like I'm wearing a watch right now that counts my steps and stuff, right? But like we are cyborg a little bit. Like we have a brain in our pocket that we use for communication and thinking and calculation. We have wristwatches on our arms that are counting our steps. But we're getting, I saw today, I don't know if you've seen this yet, Google's glasses that they're releasing.
I haven't seen it today.
They subtitle reality. So there's like, they real-time subtitle what's happening, and they can convert from language to language. So when you talk to someone of another language, it'll subtitle it in English in your glasses. Yep. They're, man, and I'm like, oh, that, so, but I'm like someone who's like immediately like, yes. So I'm very not Amish. I'm like, yeah, let's try that. What can we do with that? Right. How can we engage with that? And, you know, I mean, I look at Elon and they're this, what do they call it? The Neuralink. And I'm like, man, what does it mean when it's not a wearable, but an implant? And how does that change the conversation around our relationships? Because we are actually becoming or will become cyborg in the like technical sense. Right.
Transhuman, if you will.
That's the transhumanism conversation. And then what does that mean around humanity and the value of humanity and the role of humanity and like the future and fate of humanity? And I know that that's not something we're going to completely unpack in any one episode. But I go, these are all of the kinds of things that I would love to line these out as topics and dig into these with you and really do the homework on them.
I want to just share one quick story because
please.
I share that temptation to be skeptical. I'm very much a...
Are you?
I am. Like, I very much enjoy being out in nature and having unmediated experiences of nature. Mm-hmm. And I think my natural spiritual bent would be more towards that kind of, well, we've talked about this before, the Franciscan theology of finding Christ in nature and stuff like that. And I...
You know, it's funny, real quick, sorry to interrupt, keep going.
Go for it.
I am very Franciscan also, but I am Franciscan in ethos related to poverty.
Sure.
And I always think like, yeah, squirrels are cool too. But like the other side of the, but go on.
One of the things that I want to caution people on is if you are tempted to be negative about all of these advances, the future is not written yet. We still have the choice available to us about whether these tools will be used for good or for ill. Will this hammer be used to build the house, or will it be used to murder? Artificial intelligence is something that if you grew up on a healthy diet of Western sci-fi like I did, you're scared to absolute death about, right? Because every great sci-fi horror story begins with artificial intelligence, whether that's Terminator and
the singularity,
Skynet. Yeah,
right?
for
Like
sure,
there's
for
like
sure.
yeah. No, and by the way, I also I don't watch sci-fi, but I'm like, no, it seems like a real threat.
Horrifying, right? There's a reason why Frank Herbert in Dune, when his made-up religion for the Dune universe, what's the first commandment? Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind, right? Mm-hmm. And there's this whole backstory of how they fought a holy war against the artificial intelligences. I'm getting off on a sidetrack. Okay. AI is something that I have a real natural skepticism, to put it mildly, about.
Yeah.
Having been raised on that diet of sci-fi, right? Adam and I had a conversation with this guy who is the CEO of a company called Gaggle. And despite their hilarious name, Gaggle is doing real good in the world. Gaggle uses machine learning to help identify when teenagers are expressing either violent thoughts or suicidal ideations or other red flags for real harm to human beings, right? And when we talked, Jeff, who's the CEO of Gaggle, shared with us this story about using the machine learning to sift through thousands and thousands and thousands of social media posts and find the one young man who was expressing suicidal ideation. Their artificial intelligence, their machine learning, immediately sent an urgent red flag notification to the vice principal at his school. The vice principal at the school picked up the phone and called the local police. The local police found this young man by the train tracks and were able to save his life with minutes to spare because of this tool. And so I share that story to say the future's not written yet. We can still use this technology for good rather than for evil, but it's going to require us making deliberate choices.
Yep.
It's going to require us being thoughtful and introspective about what it is that we believe about humanity, God, right and wrong, all of that stuff. It's a heavy lift, but the future is not written, and that's where the hope lies.
There is a philosopher who's still alive that I really look up to and love. His name is Jerome Miller. He's written a couple really incredible books, one called The Way of Suffering, which is probably one of the most impactful books I've ever read. I wrote him an email as soon as I finished it, just thank you for your work.
Nice.
And he responded. And for
That's
a
cool.
short time became a donor of the well and our work.
Oh,
and
that's
then
cool.
I lost touch with him. And then when I started trying to reach out to some folks for interviews, I reached out to this guy and was able to connect with him and interview him. And I said, "Are you still writing?" He's like, "Of course I'm writing. I'm working on all kinds of stuff." And he said, "I'm writing a book about the future." I was like, "Oh, really?" And then it's funny. I started talking about technology, and he's like, "No, it's not about technology." He's like, and he actually said, "Well, I'm not gonna be able to do this justice in short time." But he said, it seems like the technologist is open to the future, but in most cases, they're trying to control it.
Yeah.
And he's like, that's the opposite of what I'm writing about. What I'm writing about is hospitality. So he said, I actually believe, and profoundly, and I won't be able to do this justice, but just like, here's the conclusion of his thought. That your posture toward the other, with a capital O, the stranger, is your posture toward the future. Because the future is the other, with a capital O.
Damn, that's good.
So he's like, if you are closed to the stranger, you're closed to the future.
Yeah.
And if you welcome the stranger, you welcome the future. And I actually went, oh, that's interesting because it probably maps to temperament. He's like, yeah, it probably does. But also, there's something to be said here about the other. So the call of, let's say, the call of God on your life to welcome the stranger is to open your door to the unknown, to the stranger, to the one that can hurt you, to the one that can, to the thing that you don't know what could come of it. Vulnerability to tomorrow. And I was like, oh, that really excited and resonated with me in my own posture toward. I always picture myself like, if there's a timeline, I'm like leaning off the front of it, like Leo off the front of the Titanic. Like I just want to lean into the wherever the hell it is that we're going. And that was like affirming, but also it seemed to map really well with like my own experience of people that are like, lock the door, open the door. Roll the window up, roll the window down, and talk to the guy on the corner, And he said, no, those postures are actually the same. And his challenge was, temperament aside, like you have to realize that you have somehow tried to control and close yourself off from vulnerability. And this is what he says a lot of technology is doing. We're trying to control what is coming versus being open to what is coming. And we're being called to something and beckoned by something. And there's a relationship to future that is like a religious person's relationship to God. Like God and future might not be separable.
Yeah. Boy. Yeah, so many thoughts on eschatology there, right? Man, I'm gonna have to chew on that one.
Well, and maybe I can send you that conversation, and
Please
you and
do.
I can make, maybe even we can share a clip of it and have a conversation about it as one of these episodes. So for those listening, we wanted to run through a bunch of things that we want to talk about, and all of these are teasers because we are not prepared for any of these, right?
No one is prepared.
But we are going to work together on this like meta mission kind of thing.
Yeah.
We are going to work together on this conversation and dialogue, like mapping out some conversations to be had and some maybe guests to be had and whatever, and just things that we think are important to engage with on the kind of ethical, spiritual, and technological realities that are emerging. And so there's a bit of a, I actually, Nick, by the way, who just left, you guys don't know this, but like this guy, Nick just left, and I said, hey, he's like, hey, can I help you guys put together like a little tune for the beginning of this? I said, yeah.
Yes, please.
I said, you know what comes to mind? Something ancient, like an old picture, like a Gregorian chant, some church type hymn type chant type old, like whatever, religious community.
Yeah.
And then futuristic AI computer sound. So we'll see what he comes up with, if we can actually pull this off. But I was like, we should, cause and by the way, I think that resembles a little of the dialogue we're trying to have. We're trying to go, what are the oldest truths of humanity that we need to not let go of? And then what is the future that we need to be open to and welcome into where we are, and say, we stand now at a threshold between the past and the future, and we have to honor our ancestors, our traditions, our past, and carry these ethics into the future. Like technology is advancing at such a rapid rate. And like King pointed out, like we're advancing far beyond our own ethical development, and we need to tighten up ethically, spiritually, intentionally moving into the future with virtue.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that might be the word. And like, what are the virtues that are needed to engage in a Web3 world, in the Taoification of everything, in the
No, and I don't want to get too far down this rabbit hole because this will occupy at least another hour of conversation, but I do think that virtue is the key word, because I think that the moment that we try to set up any sort of deontological ethics around this, we're going to fail miserably, because anything that's premised upon what you should always do is going to fail to account for the stranger. It's going to fail to account for the future. Rather, we need to focus on not setting up rules, but setting up opportunities for us to become the kind of people that are ready for the changes that we're about to see. And I love that you highlighted virtue. I think that's absolutely 100% head on.
Is there anything you want to make sure we kind of say before we wrap up today? And man, I'm ecstatic about this. I hope that those that are listening along are getting like a little bit of a taste of what things to come. There's so much that we need to dig into. And actually, as we in real life dig into this project with Meta Mission, as we dig into as I attend this Meta Church conference, as we pull out old books from spiritual fathers, church fathers, like philosophers, and try to put them in dialogue with the technologists. I think a dream would be like to Kevin Kelly to dialogue with us, like that, the man with one foot in the Amish and one foot in the future of technology. But it's like, that's a little bit of what I picture us doing in this dialogue, is like trying to hold that tension and be faithful to those conversations. Is there anything you want to make sure that we say before we wrap up here?
Man, I think you did a great job summarizing there. The only thing I'll add is I want to be faithful to the questions, because I think that, we like Socrates here, we know that we know nothing.
Yes, that's good.
We know that the only thing that we have to contribute right now isn't answers, but what we'd like to contribute with this podcast is questions.
I'm so glad you said that. I want to just state from the outset that I would say that I think agnosticism is the wisest of postures. To say, I don't know.
Right.
To all of the answers. One of the things that I think are what have bothered me the most in spiritual communities and in the church has been people acting like they know something.
Right.
Like, are you going to talk to me about life after death? I'm sorry. Are you alive?
Right.
Like,
Tell me about that one time you died. Yeah.
And I'm just like, wait a minute. Just have a little bit of like honest humility here and just go, in the end of the day, I don't actually know.
Right.
I have hope in this. I really believe in this. Like and I'm like, good, great. Like, we could dialogue about that.
Right.
But I do think there's something important about what you're saying is like, we are committed to asking questions, and exploring. And I think exploring is the right posture. We are open to things that we don't expect. We're like open to the future of this So real conversation actually is openness. It is like, I don't know where this will lead us.
Right.
What will this look like 12 episodes from now? What will this look like 2 years from now? What will this look like 3 years from now? What kinds of conversations will we be having, and where will we be having them, and how will we be having them? And we don't know the answers to those things. And I want to say we are trying to posture ourselves as radically open to the other, to God, to the future, and to the emerging realities of Web3. And yet to retain the virtues of the most ancient of traditions that we believe are central to the thriving of humanity.
Speaking of those ancient traditions, John, why don't you speak a little bit to why we chose the Catacombs as the name for this podcast?
Well, so I initially I thought, so I had a document before Ryan and I even started talking about this. I had a document I titled Crypto Theology. So it was related to all these conversations going on in Web3, and I'm paying attention to these things. And I was like, man, this is super religious. And there's a ton of ways that this overlaps with, and in fact, I'll just tell you in my own, like, let's say faith, Christian faith, for lack of a better way to frame that, faith derived from the teachings of Jesus and his people. I think that what I'm seeing emerge with blockchain maps to the dreams of the kingdom of God. And I think this is part of the coming kingdom. I really believe that.
Nice.
I think what we've been praying, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, is somewhat made manifest in, or made possible in, some of these technologies in ways that we have not seen before. So I wrote a document called Crypto Theology that is a lot of the topics that I'll bring to this, that are things that I'm interested in, right? And by the way, the list you sent me, they map almost entirely, where it's like there's not even two lists. It's the same list with some slight nuance of perspective. But
that blockchain VR convergence is really
as I
close.
thought of crypto theology
VR convergence is really
as I
close.
thought of crypto theology related to cryptocurrency, but then I thought crypt is the grave, is the and then that maps to a lot of like the dark theology, the dark night of the soul, the kind of theology of the mystics and the even the Mama T's, the Mother Teresa's of the world, the darker of the theologians and the mystics, and the place of death in the life of the church. And actually the thing that is most embraced by the most faithful is death, the martyrs and the things that we march into and accept gladly this death. And then the grave is called the crypt. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting thing. And I was like, you know what? Actually, like I said earlier in this, I think Christianity was most alive and real in the first couple centuries before it was co-opted by empire and turned back into kind of I don't know how to say that. The temple system. Yeah, what I see as a reestablishment of the temple system. And I was like, well, that was the end of Christianity as prescribed by Jesus. Yeah. We can debate that. But I go, but where did the church meet in those early years? They met in the crypts. They met in the catacombs. They met in hiding because they were illegal. They were actually the ones that they called the atheists. They were the ones that they called the anarchists. They were against the empire. When they said Jesus is Lord, they were implying that Caesar is not. Right. They were in hiding. They were called cannibals. They were called like those who hated humanity because of their faithfulness to the way and the teachings of Jesus. Now, I think that transformed the entire planet. But I think there's this overlap of these. One of it is a little bit of a play on words, but also is a bit of a return to our origins.
That's interesting because, again, you're coming at this from a strong interest in blockchain. I'm coming at this from a strong interest in VR. When I first was thinking about the catacombs, I thought about that early church having their masses in the catacombs, right? And having their masses in literally on top of the bodies of the saints and the martyrs, right? And so there was a making present of another reality there that isn't possible in the mundane, if that makes sense. Yep. And so I was having a conversation the other day about when VR actually started, and some will say like, it's the Rift. We'll push it back. There's the Sword of Damocles, which was this incredible 1960s contraption. You push it back to the 19th century. There's a stereoscope. I wonder if the genesis of VR isn't in those catacombs because there is the attempt, and we can debate whether or not it was successful or not. There's the attempt to make present something that isn't present. There is that attempt to merge the realities between heaven and earth that takes place in those masses that are taking place on the bodies of the saints and the martyrs, right? Those whose souls have left them. And so, to me, the catacombs absolutely represents everything that you were saying, but it also represents this this other reality that we're just beginning to scratch against, this other reality that we're just beginning to theologize about. I wonder if, so that was super heavy. I wonder if we can maybe end this on a more lighter note, if you will.
All right.
Give the audience an opportunity to get to know us a little better as people.
Yep.
John, what's the best meal that you've eaten recently?
You know what? It's funny because I'm hoping that I can talk my wife into doing this when I leave here.
Nice.
So there is, if you're from Tampa, this is just a recommendation. If you're not from Tampa, whatever, it is what it is. It's very specific. Mr. and Mrs. Crab.
Oh, I love Mr. and Mrs. Crab. My whole family loves Mr. and Mrs. Crab.
On Fowler Avenue, and during COVID, they were opening, but they never opened their doors.
Oh my
and then
God.
they finally opened, and then I went in there, and I had this crab boil with corn and all these different things, and I get the spiciest version of that.
Yes.
And I was over the top excited. Now it's a little expensive.
It is.
But
honestly, though, for seafood, it's not bad.
No, for the quantity, it's a really good price for what it is.
Agreed.
But it's not like a cheap nut. It's not a cheap date.
No.
But I actually said to Erica earlier, hey, it's Friday. I'm leaving next week. We won't, I'm going to be gone for date night.
Yeah.
Maybe we can double up our date night. Maybe we can like put that entire bit of it in. Cause I'm like, can we go get, so I'm actually hoping to go have the best meal that I've had recently again tonight.
Man, I pray that becomes a reality for you.
Oh, it's becoming a reality.
Say,
I'll be like, I'll just go without you. Fuck date night.
Both my wife.
I'm sorry.
Hi, Erica. That's gonna become my tagline for this entire podcast. Both my wife and my daughter in the last couple of months picked Mr. and Mrs. Crab as their birthday dinner.
Dude, it's so good.
It's so good. God. Oh my God.
Yeah, I'm in love with it. So what was your best meal?
Man, I'll be honest with you. I love being in the kitchen. I love cooking.
I see you on your Instagram.
I do post a lot of good stuff. There's something, not to get too esoteric, but there's something alchemical about that process for me that allows me to be both spiritual and physical at the same time. I love the opportunities that I have on a Friday night. Like we're recording now on a Friday. I'm probably going to stop at the grocery store, probably going to stop at Publix on my way home, pick up some really great steaks and cook those for my family. Did that last Friday, probably going to do it again today. That's the best meal I've had recently.
I love it.
So what's the best movie or TV show you've watched recently?
All right. Man, these are good. I'm glad you got these rapid fire. So I just finished. Well, there's two. Like so I like TV. I like shows. I
do too.
So I just watched all of Yellowstone.
Okay, I haven't seen that.
Bro, it's insanely good.
Okay.
And so it's Kevin Costner, this rancher in Montana, trying to like maintain this land that has been there since the family settled it in like the Oregon Trail times. Well, the like the 1800s or whatever. So it's an incredible show. It was overwhelmingly stressful. There's like, what's crazy, I'll just tell you, there's like the daughter in this family is like, so she's like my favorite character, and she's like the devil. So nice. I'm like, oh, there's this likable devil, and it's messing me up because I'm like, why do I like her so much? Is that messed up? Like, what does that say about me? And anyway, I really love this character. I really love this show. And then when you get to the end of Yellowstone, there's a prequel with actually Tim McGraw that is...
That's random.
Yeah, Tim McGraw and Faith Hill. So they're together as a couple in this, they're a couple in real life. They are, it's called 1884, and it's his grandfather of the same family. And the guy that wrote all of these, I'm forgetting his name right now, but the dude that wrote all of these actually wrote this entire like multi-generational tale of this family in the West and how they took this land, their interactions with the indigenous folks that live there, the people. And so like Yellowstone's like developers want their land and the natives want it back. And like, there's this, everybody wants their territory, but they have this, this ranch is like gargantuan. Right. And so it's this huge land and you got to like defend this like castle that they have. But then it goes back to 1884. Like, how did the settlers get to the land, find the land, establish the land? And it was a bit in relationship with the natives at that point. And then there is in the making something like 1920 something. There's a movie, there's another show coming out that's going to be like the in-between generation. And I'm ecstatic about this show.
Nice.
And then the one other, which I won't go on about, is I just, I loved Breaking Bad. Loved it.
Okay.
But I just watched Better Call Saul, which is right at the end now. Like right now, like the last few episodes are coming out. And by the end of Better Call Saul, which is the prequel to Breaking Bad, it basically becomes Breaking Bad. Like it's a lot of the same characters are in this show. And it's like, oh, this is their backstory. And like, it's well done. It's made just the same quality. And so now I'm like, find myself like watching Breaking Bad again to see like, wait, I remember these characters, but I don't remember the first scene they were in and like how we meet it. But now I have all this backstory. So now I'm like, oh, now I have to watch Breaking Bad again. So anyway, but Yellowstone, oh my gosh, one of the best shows I've seen in a long time. And by the way, just for the list, I think Yellowstone's going to close to the top of the list. But the top of the list of my favorite shows of all time are probably Breaking Bad.
Okay.
And then Vikings. And I don't know what order,
man.
but Vikings is one of the best shows I've ever seen. So Vikings, Breaking Bad, and Yellowstone actually, I think, hold the top 3 positions, but I don't know how to like put them in order. Yeah.
Dang. Okay. So for me, it's my wife and I. Hi, Fallon. We'll throw that tagline in there. For me, my wife and I have been doing a rewatch of the first 2 seasons of Dairy Girls. And if you're not familiar,
That show's really funny.
oh my God,
It's
hilarious. But also not just hilarious, but brilliant in its anthropology, because what's great about Dairy Girls, so for those of you that don't know, Dairy Girls is a comedy set in Derry, Northern Ireland, during the 1990s in the midst of all the troubles. And what's great about all of that is that the troubles are really just background noise to very ordinary teenage lives. And it is just brilliant insight into what it is like to be a teenager while all of this is going around you, because all of this quote unquote around you really is just background noise to the show. And so I love laughing at the genius dialogue that's been constructed for that show, but I also love the anthropology of just like, hey, this is a teenager. Let's look at what a teenager is. So that's my most. That's always going to be a perennial favorite for me. Dairy Girls is always towards the top of my list.
That's funny. I wouldn't place it anywhere even close to high on my list.
Oh man!
But I was like, this is amusing. They're really funny.
If you get nothing else out of that show, it is in fact hilarious.
Well, and
season 3 is coming out soon.
All
so
the kind of Irish turn of phrase, accent stuff. It's like, oh, you
got to listen closely.
They're just you need subtitles.
Yeah,
but they're delightful.
Yeah.
They're delightful.
Absolutely
delightful gals.
Lots of religious themes that we could explore possibly on this podcast. John, what's the best book that you've read in the last year or 2?
I suck at questions like this.
That's okay. You're knocking this out of the park so far.
A year or 2. Okay, so I'm going to give you 2 because one of them I read for the first time, and one of them I'm just rereading right now, which is like I'm rereading it because it's a great book. So it's like not fair.
Sure.
But the book that I encountered in the last few years is Brian Moresco, I think is how you say his name. The Immortality Key.
Okay.
And it is it's such a good book. So he was a lawyer that somehow found his way into researching the history of psychedelics.
So like a Tim Leary sort of guy, or
no,
Okay,
actually,
okay.
no. What's interesting is he's never used psychedelics. And actually, this is related to
so like
something
a Michael Pollan sort of guy.
It's like religion. Yeah.
Okay.
Who definitely has used psychedelics, by the way. But
but he says that thing where he like microdosed, like
no, he dosed.
Did
Yeah.
he? Okay. There's been an update to the Michael Pollan story that I wasn't aware of.
yeah. He's definitely experienced. So the as far as I understand, but the reality of this guy, it's actually more like a religious studies.
Okay.
So he's exploring the origins of religion and philosophy related to the Greek mysteries and Eleusis, actually in particular.
Yeah.
And what role did hallucinogenics play in Eleusis? And he actually makes the argument strongly, and not just like, oh, I'm making a case for, like, this dude got into like Vatican vaults. This dude got into like he pulls in all of these. He actually said he almost lost his like marriage and life doing this research because he got obsessed with the question of like,
holy shit.
Like he's like, was the Last Supper mushrooms? Like was the like what role in the development of humanity's like religious framework does hallucinogenics play?
Spoiler alert, we're going to talk about this a lot on a future episode.
Okay, great. So
because I think, and for those of you who are not familiar with the Eleusinian mysteries, Persephone and Hades, go ahead and Google that myth and dive in there and think about the harrowing of hell, but also think about the Eucharist if you're of a Christian persuasion.
Yep.
And also think about John sharing at the beginning of the show that he met Jesus while he was
so that's a big part of why I also love this book. Is like, this is actually my experience.
We're going to dive into this a lot in future episodes.
I really dug into this this book, and I got obsessed with it. And oh, by the way, it actually goes back to like early beer. Mm-hmm. So like ergot is a wheat that there's a ergot is a mold kind of thing that grows on wheat that ends up in beer, because and by the way, you can read these old texts about people drinking wine and the visions that they're having. It's like, you don't get that from wine.
Right.
What wine are you drinking?
Right.
And it's like, well, if your wine is mixed with ergot, then basically, and by the way, ergot, I'll just say, jump to ergot is a key ingredient in LSD. Mm-hmm. So like, okay. And then he has these ethnobotanists that like go into, now a lot of ancient artifacts have been treated and cleaned and preserved. Mm-hmm. But they were able to find these old artifacts that have not been, and they had these ethnobotanists test them and find residue of these ergot chemicals. Wow. And so he goes, but he's like, and at the heart of this book is this sentence: if you die before you die, then when you die, you will not die. And this is at the heart of, he's like, all religions and philosophy. And he's like, so if you die before you die, then when you die, you will not die. And there is this thing that happens that all of these philosophers reference in Eleusis, that is like, it was a secret rite of passage that people would go to.
Right.
Everybody would go there.
Right.
Once in their adult life,
at least, and
there was but if you talked about what happened, like, it was a prohibition against talking about what happens there, and so you have all these illusions, but they say Eleusis is the most important thing in the development of democracy, in the development of Western civilization, in the development of, and it is credited with everything.
Right. And
so he traces this back. So you asked me, what's the most important or interesting or compelling book I read in the last couple of years? It was The Immortality Key, because of the overlap of religious studies and ancient technologies, and how that maps to, and my interest in current research on psychology, neurology, and psychoactive drugs with MAPS and with Johns Hopkins. I am really paying attention to the research that's going on in hallucinogenics, because, oh, by the way, everybody not everybody, but most of the majority of people in these tests with Johns Hopkins are saying this is among the top most important things that have ever happened in my life. They're transforming their relationship with death. They're transforming their relationship with their family. They're transforming their relationship with addictive substances.
Right.
And they are being completely transformed by a one-time interaction with something like psilocybin. And I can't help but think this is a very, very important thing. And looking back to my own story, going, bro, like, this resonates. This was my experience, actually. Like, my Genesis encounter with openness to the divine and the transformation of my life was a hallucinogenic experience. Man. So that book has been, and then, oh, by the way, I said I'd mention two. The other one is The Kingdom of God is Within, Leo Tolstoy, kind of the,
oh boy. Okay.
And you and I will dig into that at some point very soon.
It's said that if you're a Russian literature fan, you're either a Tolstoy fan or a Dostoevsky fan.
I'm a both fan.
And as a Dostoevsky fan, I can't say that I approve of your second choice, but I'm super interested in diving into your first choice with you, because I think there's so much to delve into there. Man, the first thing that pops in my mind is body-mind dualism, like we were talking about there, right? Yeah. There's so much to dive into there.
So much.
Stay tuned. Subscribe to the Catacombs, and you too will get into all of these conversations with us. I would say for me, the most impactful book I've read recently has been a book by Henry Louis Gates called The Black Church. And you might recognize the name Henry Louis Gates from a few years ago. He was the theologian and philosopher who had the poorly named beer summit with President Obama and the cop that arrested him a few years ago. He was the Harvard scholar that got arrested outside of his own home because as he was trying to come home after I think it was a vacation, and trying to get into his own home, he couldn't find his own key, and a cop came by and arrested him for trying to get into his own home, and then ended up having a beer summit with President Obama and the cop that arrested him. Henry Louis Gates was a brilliant and well-known scholar long before the beer summit, and just within the last couple of years wrote a book called The Black Church, and I read that recently, and it gave me hope for what church can be and should be, if that makes sense. I think that, I am someone who, I think we share this, John. I think I'm naturally skeptical towards institutions and naturally skeptical towards big organizations, if you will. But Henry Louis Gates has really written a love note to the institution of the Black Church, and really made me rethink what that institution has meant in the lives of its members, and really has given me renewed hope for what this organization, this institution that we call the church can and should be in the world today. So it challenged a lot of my thinking in a good way.
Yeah. I should read that. I think you mentioned that to me recently, because I can't imagine anything that is going to make me think that institution is a good thing.
Yeah, right.
And I'll dig into that. Not to say that hasn't played an important role in the Black Church. I actually can anticipate a lot of the points that'll be made.
Sure.
I just think that I will want to discount the importance of the central institutional piece of that. And yet in a world that only respects institution, and in a world that collective has to be represented with icon, perhaps that is an important feature of this community, having a centralized pastoral figure and iconic representation, like that the community is represented as the sum of its parts or whatever.
Right.
I can imagine why it would play a really for a repressed or suppressed community, like why that would be an important, like the collective would really matter. And I go, yeah, the collective really matters. The instantiation with the state, or the instantiation in any legal entity, and the centralization of control might be the piece that I take a contrast with. And yet I haven't read it, so that homework. But then at the same time, by the way, guys, that's what really excites me about the emergence of things like DAOs. That and I think Ryan and I are going to both experiment with and talk a lot about the potential future of gathering community without centralizing control, and there's a lot of power to be had among collectives that can now be done in a way that doesn't necessitate centralized command, control, leadership, centralized trust in bookkeeping or something like that. And we'll talk more about that, I'm sure, on a future episode.
John, who's a public intellectual or thought leader that our listeners who are brand new to this space, maybe brand new to blockchain or VR or any of what we've talked about today, who's a thinker that our listeners should stop what they're doing and either go follow on social media or go buy a book from or go watch a TED Talk from, or who's somebody that our listeners should be paying attention to if they're new to this?
Yeah, I'll tell you this. I think that there is not, like, the reason we're doing this podcast is that there's not much that exists at the overlap.
Sure.
So I'll give you two because there's an overlap that doesn't exist. And I think hopefully we can try to contribute to that overlap, and hopefully more will follow. But I would say on the faith, ethics, philosophy side, Cornel West is at the top of my list
Amen.
of people that you should be paying attention to, listening to, admiring. By the way, it's worth signing up for. What is that? Masterclass.
Yeah, his masterclass.
He just did a masterclass on philosophy that I've listened to like 5 times.
I told you that I made my 11-year-old watch that, right?
I would make. Well, I don't know if 11. I don't know how that went, but
you know my 11-year-old, so you know it went well.
You do have a pretty sharp 11-year-old. So I would definitely follow and listen to Cornel West.
Yeah.
Who is a brilliant black intellectual, theologian, philosopher that is really contributing substantially to thought leadership in my estimation. And then at the same time, on the blockchain side, I honestly think, and whatever, I don't know, there's probably a million things. The 2 names that come to mind, well, one is a team, but you can just go subscribe to the Bankless podcast. So I think Bankless is probably the best podcast that I've come across. They do a weekly roll up every Friday. Here's what's going on in crypto this week. They drop episodes throughout the week with all kinds of things. They have a thing called Layer Zero that interviews people that are like founders or participants in these like emerging communities. But then also like, list last, I don't want to time date us, but like there was some really important things that happened in the crypto ecosystem. One of the biggest negative events that happened in all of crypto history happened very recently, and they immediately came out with like here's what you need to know and how to understand what's happening. These guys are brilliant thought leaders in that space specifically, and I would even say are good dudes and actually have made some really great, let's say, predictions in that space. So really good. And then Balaji, who I referenced earlier, who was the guy that Balaji Srivanasan, if I said his name right, which I'm never going to be sure that I can, is a man who I am convinced can see further than me into the future. And Balaji said it is should give you chills in terms of what is to come. The man can reliably predict what's around the corner, and you can trace him back for over a decade of being able to do this, both with his investments as well as with his and I just don't know that I've seen a smarter, more what's the word? Prescient?
Sure, yeah.
To see the future, right? To see ahead of time. This man is wildly in tune with what's happening and what's coming, and wildly invested in building that future as well. So both pushing what he dreams of, as well as anticipating what is coming from what is beckoning us. And I think his relationship to the future, like we were talking about before, is admirable, and he is someone that I would recommend listening to.
Nice. So I'll say, you talk about understanding the future. In terms of understanding the past, Blake J. Harris wrote a book called The History of the Future that details the founding of Oculus. And if you are new to the VR space or new to Web3 in general, Blake J. Harris is a fantastic place to start.
That's good.
The History of the Future will tell you about the founding of Oculus as a company and help you better understand why there's so much buzz and so much excitement around the advancements that they've been able to make. Since I can't say Cornel West for my second one, since you already stole that one from me, I will say Cornel West's very dear friend Slavoj Žižek, who I don't agree with on a lot, but I feel very strongly that every generation needs a Diogenes, and Slavoj Žižek is a really damn good Diogenes. And if you need someone to challenge how you see the world, challenge your perception of reality, challenge what you've always believed to be right and wrong, Slavoj will make you at least come prepared to defend what you believe. Slavoj will challenge you. And if you're looking for a great intro to Slavoj without diving into some of his more opaque books, The Pervert's Guide to Ideology is a movie that he made that can be found pretty easily on YouTube. I think you might wind up paying $3.99 or something like that to watch it, or you might just watch it in pieces for free on YouTube. But Slavoj Žižek's The Pervert's Guide to Ideology is a fantastic place to start. And then go follow him, and then you and I can trade memes back and forth on Slavoj, because he's also today's most memeable philosopher.
So there is a movie called The Examined Life.
Nice.
That I don't know. You haven't seen it?
I don't think I have.
Dude, so I don't know where you could find it today, but find it.
Okay.
Google it. Use Google. And it's
Yeah.
worth purchasing. It's called The Examined Life. And both Cornel West and Slavoj Žižek are in it as two of the...
You know what's fascinating is I can't remember off the top of my head what it was. There was an event recently, and by recently I mean within the last couple of years, where Cornel and Slavoj were the two guest panelists at an event, and they totally ran over the moderator. It was great to watch. The moderator was just,
I think I watched them
shaking in his cheeks. But also, Cornel is the only person I've ever seen who commands Slavoj's respect. Slavoj is kind of an arrogant dick, and I mean that in the best possible way. But Slavoj doesn't respect anyone, as far as I can tell, on planet Earth, except for Cornel West. And watching their interaction is absolutely fascinating.
Did they talk about in that one, like, dealing with racism?
I think they did.
And Slavoj, well, I'm guaranteed that they did.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But Slavoj said, "I want to know your most profane jokes," and he started saying like let's just tell our racist jokes to each other. And
no, I think I think we're talking about different events.
Yeah,
okay, all right.
He's like, let's, and so he tells several racist jokes.
Cornel does.
No, Slavoj
does.
Oh yes,
Oh,
no, it's
boy.
definitely Slavoj.
Oh boy. Okay.
But they were Russian racist.
Yeah,
They, like based on where they are. But it was like he talked about some people group that is considered lazy, and he's like told a joke where the man dug there was an earthquake that was going to come, and the man dug a hole in the ground and lay there, put his penis in it so that it would masturbate him because he's so lazy. Like, it was like, these people are so lazy that they did this, right? But he's like, he was actually communicating like how much, like, we need to stop being careful.
Yeah.
We need to say the crudest of the things that we've inherited and actually find intimacy in those things. It was a really great dialogue, and maybe they've done several things together. But anyway, The Examined Life is it's just 5. So, if you guys don't know the reference, there is the Socrates said the examined life is not worth living.
The unexamined life is not worth living.
Sorry. Let me correct this. The unexamined life is not worth living. It was the intro of Dostoevsky's Notes from the Underground. That in the intro that someone else wrote said Dostoevsky demonstrated that the examined life is perhaps not worth living either. And
we should do a Dostoevsky
episode. And so that line has messed me up and stuck with me forever when I think about the examined life. But there's a documentary called The Examined Life, and I believe they interview 5 philosophers, contemporary philosophers. One is Zizek, one is Cornel West, and then there's 3 others. Those are definitely my 2 highlights in the show.
Of course. And
they just let them rant. And actually, Zizek is in a garbage dump. There's behind him, while they're talking, they're like moving trash in these, there's like this backhoe moving trash in this dump. And he's like pointing to it. Like, if you can't love this, you can't love anything about existence. And like, it's just so good. And then, Cornel West is actually just, the cameraman is in the passenger seat of a cab that he gets in to take like a 7-minute commute across New York.
Okay.
And they just point the camera in the back, and he just rants for 7 minutes till he gets out at wherever he's going. And like some of the other philosophers, like one takes a walk and whatever, really worth looking up. But it's one place that you can find both of these thinkers in an incredible kind of ranting form. They just give them stage to talk about like
amazing
what's
ranters.
life all about. Oh yeah, so good. And watching them dialogue is always incredible.
John, what do you say we land this plane? Mm-hmm. Parting thoughts for the audience.
So my charge to everyone, and always, not just like because we're talking about all this stuff, is pay attention and take responsibility.
Yeah.
Those are the two things that echo in my head all the time. Like what's happening, like be alert, pay attention, and then take some responsibility. Like assume that it's on your shoulders.
That's right.
There's a lot of things outside yourself that you cannot control, but you can control what you do next, what you decide, what you pay attention to even. And so my parting words is pay attention and take some responsibility.
I love that. I'm going to come back to a line that I've mentioned a couple of times, and that line is, the future is not written yet. It is so tempting in the midst of inevitable technological advance to take a determinist track. Mm-hmm. It is so tempting to think about destiny and think about fate and to think about the inevitability of certain things. And while I definitely agree that technology is going to keep advancing, whether we want it to or not, what we do with that technology, that future is not yet written. And it's on us, it's on the current generation to decide that we are going to be thoughtful, that we're going to be reflective, we're going to be introspective, we're going to take seriously the challenges and the obstacles that are placed in our path. And future generations are going to look back on us and they're going to decide whether or not we did a good job. They're going to decide whether or not we were faithful. And regardless of whether or not you come from the Christian tradition like John and I do, there is a responsibility to think about the greater implications of these technologies that we are going to have in our lives. And so the future is not yet written, so go out and be purposeful. And I think that coincides perfectly with what we were saying, John.
Yep. Guys, thanks for hanging with us. Thanks for doing this.
Absolutely.
And we do not know the frequency with which these are going to come out, so subscribe and turn on some notification if you're interested and want to hang with us. And as the next few come out, we will lay out some more thought out plans about the schedule and about when you can comment and how you can comment and where you can comment. We are just starting and going through the journey. This is us documenting the process and the journey. And we hope over the next couple of years, you will walk with us as we we take responsibility and lean into the meta and try to find what God has for us there.
We will leave in the show notes a way to get in contact with us, but we are serious when we say we're committed to being faithful to the questions. And so whatever questions you have, please do send them to us. Find us in the show notes, find a way to get in contact with us, and we'll be excited to interact with your questions because it's important that we all question. Guys, thank you so much for tuning into the very first episode of The Catacombs. We look forward to talking to you very, very, very soon.